probably only a very few people noticed what happened over the last couple of weeks. I had recorded 2 Fridays ago a part 2 to my last episode, and I discovered to my horror that I needed to take it down. So it was only up for a day or two. I don't know if anybody really looked at it, but it's gone again. And I did it in a kind of cautious, respectful response to something I had discovered. Uh, in that episode, there were 2 different case presentations about a variety of different kinds of human struggles. And during the weeks afterwards, I found to my dismay that there were people in both of the families I had been talking about who were connected to each other in some way. And at least one of the people expressed some interest in following me on some of my presentations. And I thought I didn't want to run the risk of somebody knowing somebody else's business without am I inadvertently violating their confidentiality. So to maintain safety and separation between the various groups of people, I just took the episode down so I wouldn't be saying a lot of things about what was going on in those 2 human collectives. So I will start where I left off. The main theme was that psychologists are highly individualistic. We supposedly get training in what it is we're to do if someone comes in to see us, but it's not like training to do a practical thing that has definable steps to it. It's more like going to art school. You get a kind of generalized training in how to make art that could look beautiful, but there's no correct way to draw a tree. There's no direct way to portray beauty. That's highly idiosyncratic. Idiosyncratic. It depends upon the one making the art. So I like to say about my own calling that our calling can be studied scientifically, but it cannot be enacted scientifically. It is always an artistic enterprise uh, to build a relationship with the client, a relationship that could be of some meaning to the client. That's never something that can be taught mechanically. And I was then saying each of us who is in this calling is on his or her own personal journey. We have not only the training we receive, but we have, I love that old trade, we live out the vicissitudes of our own lives. Events happen to us, tragedies happen to us, triumphs happen to us, stresses happen to us. And wonder of wonders, we have the learning that goes on because our clients are constantly teaching about varieties of life and varieties of life dilemmas. And we get a chance to learn from our clients as much as we do to use our learning to help them with what it is that they would like our attention called to. So each of us is unique. We are like jigsaw puzzle pieces being sawed and shaped this way, that way, and bulge in here and bulge out there. Or to use another metaphor, we're like snowflakes. Each of us might be quite beautiful, but none of us is exactly like any other. So therefore, part of the magic of the therapy consists of whether the linkage between a particular therapist with his or her life experiences and ways that he and or she was taught and ways that he and she or she have continued to learn is congruent with and fits together in some magical way with the needs, the yearnings, and the struggles of a particular client or a family or a couple, depending on what the nature of the client is. So I'm only making it hard for any of you who are listening to this saying, how do I find the right therapist? I don't have any easy answer to that question. As you'll see, well, I'll save that for the end. As you'll see, I will arrive at least some thoughts about how to find a therapist. But I again want to get into case material because I want to use cases to demonstrate the particularity of any client therapist relationship. So the 2 clients I will use this week are different from the 2 clients I used 2 weeks ago. My first client is a former student. Uh, She graduated from the California School of Professional Psychology about 17, 20 years ago. I knew her only vaguely. I didn't actually have her in any classes, but I had some occasion to interact with her, and I don't remember about what. But she seemed to be a decent young woman, and whatever were the minor interactions we had, I found her very pleasant and almost delightful. So I was really touched when I got a call from her that she wanted my professional services. And she had a particular kind of professional services that she wanted from me. She didn't want traditional, quote, mental health services at all. She had moved on in her career, and she was in some kind of existential crisis with her career, and she had a bunch of practical dilemmas in her career too. And so she wanted a kind of career counseling from me. So what was her career? She had been absolutely magnificent as far as I was concerned. She, for the first 5, 10 years of her life after graduate school, she worked in the women's prison. She was a psychologist for women prisoners, and she has a very high social service orientation. She was happy to work with that population. It was a population of abused, damaged, complex, poor human beings, many of people of color and of strange ethnicities who have been trapped in the prison system. And she delighted being of whatever help she could to that population. After a while, she had gotten married, and her husband's career took him out away from the main urban area in Los Angeles and way out into the hinterland somewhere. And now she was stuck with what she was going to do, and she decided she was going to give up her prison job. And she thought about moving into an adjoining county that was rural and conservative. If anything, it was a Republican county in texture. It had a small group of people of color there. It had some other ethnicities there, not a large portion of population. It was mainly working class white people who lived in that particular county. And what she wanted to do was she wanted to open a counseling center for the disadvantaged, for the people who are on the edge of poverty, for the less well-to-do, for people of color, for some of the immigrants who are showing up there, mainly from Mexico or from Central America. And she wanted to specialize in bringing psychological care to people who wouldn't ordinarily think about psychological care, be motivated to come. And if they were, the existing structures in the county were probably ill prepared to deal with the kinds of issues they would bring up, and not be prepared as empathically as she was to understand the dilemma she was hearing about. So she opened her practice and she introduced herself in the power struggle. She went to the county mental health offices. She went to whatever free clinics there were. She went to physicians who specialized in working with her population. She introduced herself to them, and she told them about the center she was hoping to open. And wonder of wonders, she succeeded within her beyond her fondest dreams. Within 10 years of opening her center, she had 17 employees that were working full-time providing psychological services. Most of them were people of color and poor people too, who had come back and become psychologists. And as a matter of fact, she had given up almost all of her practice. She was down to seeing only 4 clients because all her time was taken up managing the institution that she had founded, supervising the newer members, figuring out what the policy should be, negotiating insurance contracts, anything she needed to do as a chief psychologist and as a business person running a business enterprise. And she did it very, very successfully. One of the things that had happened to her, though, when she had left the prison system was, as a poor young woman, she had taken on over $300,000 worth of student debt in order to get her doctorate. And that was quite crushing. Even though her husband made a good living, how they could ever afford a house or how they could get their noses above water seemed very daunting. And she knew, because she was not a stupid person, that if she went to work for a nonprofit full time, she would get a big chunk of forgiveness of her loan obligation each year, one for one. 1 year of loan obligation would be forgiven for each year she put in that kind of service. Well, she was able, with some cunning, to get a business manager to supplement her in the practice, and she was able to cut down her need to be in the practice to maybe 10 or 12 hours a week. So she felt if she found the right part-time job, not part-time, full-time job even, in a nonprofit, she could pull it off and still keep her hand into the management of her primary love, the center she had founded. That did not qualify for relief because she she made profit on it. That was the salary she was taking. So she managed to do so. There was in that county a institution of higher learning. It was a Christian university, and the Christian university had a social work department. They had a graduate program in social welfare, and they were happy to hire her as one of the faculty members, teaching child development and some other courses. She was appointed a full-time professor in the university. So that qualified her for the aid reduction that she was getting. What she wanted to talk to me about was being in that university was almost unbearable. She hated the students. The students came from among the most privileged of the poorer people in that county. They were fundamentalist Christians. They were spoiled young women, most of them, and they had a lot of racial prejudice and ethnic prejudice. And she was a black woman teaching them, and she would hear them muttering behind her back, "Why does she have to come here?" And she was not very welcome on the campus or with the student body. Year after year, she started teaching and getting lousy student evaluations from the students. They resented her. They resented her for being black, and they resented her because she was demanding they learn. She gave them really quite respectable assignments, quite challenging exams, quite interesting papers to write. And they would tell her literally, "We pay enough goddamn tuition to this place. You don't have to work our asses off. We want to get good grades. We want you to just to understand who we are and give us good grades without asking us to do all this crap that you're asking us to do." Now, the dean gave her no support. The dean didn't care diddly squat. It's possible the dean was having a love affair with his administrative assistant, that very nice Christian man. All he cared about was that he had to keep on the good side of the wealthy families in the congregation of the church that the school was part of and in the alumni of the school. And he did not dare go against them because they really controlled the purse strings in the institution, and they had the power to fire him if they were unhappy with him. So he was constantly telling her to cool it, to listen to the feedback she's getting, and she has to understand he'll tell her how to be a success in her job. And she had this constant running, ongoing bad relationship with him. I stumbled over something a few minutes ago. I have been derelict in something. I know what it takes to create a nonprofit. I think she needs to explore the possibility that she would take her own treatment center and somehow turn it into a nonprofit center. She can certainly pay nice salaries to herself and to the therapist there. She doesn't have to Her profits that she distributes for charitable works don't have to be 100% of what they take in. It could be maybe as little as 10 or 20% of what they take in. And it might be possible for her to convert her own enterprise and tell the dean and the faculty in the institution she teaches in to go screw themselves, which is what she wants to do. I'm illustrating the principle I'm trying to make. I myself was a school administrator. I'm very familiar with the pain she mentions about the boring nature of most faculty members, the pettiness that exists in the politics of the faculty, the constant irritation that goes on between senior administration and faculty members, and the tension to sell out to students and just give them pablum and just give them any grades, huge grade inflation problems. All of this is endemic in institutions of higher education. I know them from the inside because I was in that role myself for many, many years and had to deal with the kind of stressor she's dealing with right now. So I was a particularly worthwhile person for her to start therapy with, and I will hope that I can continue to help her to rescue herself from what I consider are very justified complaints. And she has a talent that could be put to better use elsewhere. So I think that's enough to say about the first case. No, I'll wait until I'm finished. And we'll talk about both of them. Second case I presented before. I have additional information because life has been running, but second case is a man referred to me by a former client who is a very well-known artist and is now in retirement. This is a friend of the artist, and the friend of the artist got himself into a serious crisis. His marriage with his wife had been problematic for many years now. They are the parents of twin boys, and the boys are just now getting ready to head off to school. One's going to NYU and one's going to Berkeley. They're fraternal twins, and they are as different as almost any siblings. There are very few points of overlap in their personalities. In this case, nature rather than nurture was very important to them, and each of them is quite a unique human being. The relationship between the father and between the mother and the children is good. The children are very caring towards their parents. They're not at all rebellious or into any problems. They're moving swiftly and well into big emancipation off to the dormitories at the universities they're going to. And the wife thought with the passing of the children out of the house, she and the husband would have more free time to do things that were share interesting experiences with each other. The mother is a retired makeup artist from the motion picture industry, and she made a very, very good living. And he has also a trust fund, so they are very wealthy as a couple. They have no worries about their old age whatsoever. They live in a beautiful house in the nicest part of Santa Monica. The house is probably worth between 14 and 16 million dollars where they live. So that's a nice asset. He knows my former client because he too is aspiring in the art world. He is not successful in any way. Once in a while, he gets a gallery to show a few of his pieces. Once in a while, maybe every few years, he might sell something, but he's certainly not supporting himself as an artist. That's not his major calling. His major calling is managing his finances and the property. And he also has a second piece of property. He owns a small building in Venice that's his studio. He goes there to make his art. He doesn't make art at home. So he likes going out to the studio. What was the problem in the marriage? Well, his wife was increasingly aloof. It became very bad in the year before the birth of the children. They discovered as they tried to get pregnant in that year that there was a bad fertility problem. And so here again, My own personal life history was of great value to me because my poor former childhood bride, my young high school sweetheart, and I, who made a young marriage, also when we were in our late 20s, felt it was time to start producing a family and had to struggle with infertility. Infertility problems are a demon of the soul. They're very lacerating, they're very upsetting, they're very stressful. The managing of them is very difficult. They can become quite expensive. They raise powerful existential questions about how much money are you willing to spend risking your future or your present assets, hoping you'll have a child, not knowing for sure whether you will, and or do you give up? And then do you adopt? Do you not have any children at all? Do you kind of just resign yourself to being a childless couple? Then there are a variety of different interventions that can be done to undo infertility. Do you have do in vivo creation of embryos that then get implanted in the mother? Would that work? Do you want to try that? Do you need to get an egg donor to donate eggs because the mother's eggs are no good? But can the mother carry the baby in her womb? Is her womb okay? Or do you have to get an egg donor and you have to get a surrogate mother to carry the womb, carry the fetus or fetuses that are generated in the process? All these complicated issues have to be debated and struggled with and tried on experientially, plus figuring out the budgets that are attached to any of those particular paths. This proved to be very stressful for them. And the mother particularly seemed to be reverberating to the stress. In the beginning, when they were still trying to have sex naturally, she would grit her teeth and she would surrender and she would allow him to, quote, penetrate her and have sex. It was clear she was not there emotionally. She hated what she was going through. And if it wasn't for the issue of trying to conceive a child, she wouldn't have been participating in fornicating with him at all. And he knew that, he could feel it. It came to a forlorn closure after she carried the babies. They didn't have a surrogate mother. They put her fertilized by in vitro fertilization. They put 4 frozen, then thawed out fetuses in her womb because you don't want to go through this again. So you put in more than you think are actually going to survive. There's a certain loss rate every time you try and put potential fetuses into wombs, and 2 of them survived. So she had those fraternal twins. He was the biological father of both, and so was she. It was her eggs and his sperm. But she had to have a cesarean because of the twins were rather large at the time she went into labor, and they didn't want to risk any natural birth with twins that were large. So she went through the pain of that and a long convalescence from the abdominal surgery she went through. And he tried after about 2 months to reinitiate sexuality with her, and she said, "No, I'm not ready." And he tried again about a month after, and she said, I'm not ready. If and when I get ready, I'll let you know. And I'm really sorry. I wish I could rewrite his history. He gave up trying or asking after that. He could feel there was something in the feeling state with which she expressed herself that suggested to him this was very problematic and risky and difficult for her to confront and deal with. And he owed it to her not to pull at her. So in the beginning, he simply satisfied himself by masturbating about 3 times a week. That's what he would do. He would discharge his sexual tension, daydream about being with her. Slowly, the daydreams radiated out from being with her to being with unknown others. And then he began to experiment with pornography. And sometimes he enjoyed watching some couples more than other couples. And you imagine what it would be to be the man in a particular couple. And by the end of some years of celibacy on his part, well, would you call that celibacy? I don't know. That merits the label of celibacy. Clearly, he was not having sexual intercourse with a woman. And he went on in that way. He felt like he didn't want to betray her. He didn't want to be an adulterer. But the yearning in him expanded, and he started looking up and going to Korean massage parlors where it was clear that somebody would masturbate him at the end of the massage. And he would get off, if not by having intercourse with a woman, by at least the woman rubbing his penis. And that became his preferred way now of trying to take care of his sexuality. Happy massages intermixed with individual episodes of self-masturbation. Even that dike did not stay in place. The erotic impulse got stronger, started breaking down barriers, and he then discovered that there was a website of married people who wanted to have affairs without involvement, and that he could shop for a potential partner on the website, and he could have recreational sex with the partner without any emotional attachment or involvement, supposedly. I guess there's always a risk. You might actually start caring about this person who shows up with you. How strange, but that's certainly a possibility. So he had gone off for his first experience. He had made his first match and had some conversations with her. They tried to figure out where to go and when this would happen, and they showed up, and she seemed pleasant enough, and he actually relaxed into and enjoyed the experience with her. And then he went home. He always had things he could say about his absences. He could say he was thinking about a painting that was gnawing at him. He was going to the studio for some hours. He'd always take a cell phone with him so he could cover his own tracks. He had warned the woman that if his phone rang, he would answer it. And she said she would do the same thing because she had cooked up some story for her husband. But at any rate, he had his phone there and he took his phone home again. She said, "How are you?" He said, "Oh, I'm tired. I had a really productive evening. I'm ready to go to bed." She said, "That's fine. I'll be ready to come to bed soon." And then she heard his cell phone go off after he had left the room and gone upstairs. And it was set on his text messaging. And she heard his text messaging go off. And she thought maybe she should look at it and tell him who's chasing him. And so she looked, and it was the woman that he had been with. Said, "It was nice meeting you and being with you this evening. I left something, I think, in the hotel room. Did you find it, and did you take it away with you?" That's what the text message was. Well, the wife knew immediately what had happened. There had been a real other woman that he had become sexual with. She didn't know the details of it, but she got furious and hurt, and they had a scene. She came storming up into the bedroom and she said, "You have to leave. I can't have you here. I don't know what to do about this. I don't know how to manage it. And I just know I can't stand this violation. And I just have to think, go stay in your studio. There's a bed there and you have a bathroom, and I'll let you know if and when I feel ready to talk to you." So right after that, the next morning, he did go and stay. When he woke up that morning, he had a cell phone with him. He called my former client. He said, "I know you saw a psychologist for a while, found it helpful. I think I need a professional to help me with what's happening. I don't know what to do. I don't want a divorce. I feel terrible. I feel awful. I feel like I've harmed my wife. I don't know what to do to try and repair it, or how to try and get back and be with her in any meaningful way. Do you know somebody I could see? It's an emergency. Would somebody see me quickly?" So he'd given the man my number, and I'd seen him that very day when he was forlornly in his studio. I'd managed to have a cancellation filled with him. And I felt very privileged to be with him. I had shared the common experience of infertility, and I knew enough, plenty about how painful and lacerating it was. It had almost become a subspecialty of mine to welcome couples who were struggling with infertility. It's a cohort of human beings that has a very large divorce rate, and people just can't stand the strain they're under. They get very angry, very vicious. They want to blame the other person. They want to separate. They want to try again with a different partner. It's very, very, very challenging arrangement. arrangement. I was glad that I had some wisdom about it. I also had a colleague in the American Psychological Association. I was very privileged. She was on the board of one of the divisions of the association at the time. I was on the same division. It was the Division of Family Psychology. And she was a specialist in the repair of broken marriage in the aftermath of infidelity. Her name was Shirley Glass. I'm sorry that she died at a fairly young age. She was only in her late 60s. But she and I hit it off as fellow board members. I remember going out for drinks with her and several other people a few times. And we talked a lot. And I said I was interested in her work. She had limited her practice by then. That's all she did was work with people in the aftermath of the discovery of infidelity, either individuals who wanted to heal from it or people who wanted to try and put their marriages back together if they could. And she said she was writing a book. I asked her if would she send me a copy of her book when it came off the presses, which she did. And I loved her book. I think it's one of the best resources available. And I often use it now when I have somebody who is in that horrible jungle and trying to survive in it. So that's one of the first things I said to my client. By the time he got to me, by the way, he had an added other dilemma. His 19-year-old twin sons had gotten in touch with him and said, "You are a fucking scumbag. We never expected this again. You did something terrible to our mother. How could you be unfaithful to her? We don't know what we're going to do with you. For the time being, we don't want to have anything to do with you." So he was being now rejected by his sons as well as by his wife and sitting there in the isolation of his empty studio. And so I gave him as much compassion as I could. And I said, he was confronting very difficult odds. The statistics are that only about 20% of the marriages that are living through what you're living through get mended and wind up being effective again. There's a larger portion, maybe 50% of them, where people do not get a divorce, but they continue hating each other, feel wounded by each other, and they live in quiet misery until the children grow up or until some more distant date because they feel like they don't have the wherewithal to leave the marriage. They don't have the resiliency to go on a search for a different partner. They couldn't stand the shame and the acknowledgement in the community about what a terrible thing has happened to them. So they live silently with pain and bitterness, and that's not very good. So only about 20% of what you're telling me about suggests to me that there could be a good outcome. I'm glad you came to see me. I think I have some good expertise about what the moves are you might make. And so I can tell you what some of them are. First one, do not protest or try to argue with your sons. Don't tell them you don't understand what I lived through. Let me justify what I was doing. Make no justification. Make no counter argument to them. Tell them you're really terribly sorry that you hurt them. You were not going to pull at them. You hope someday in the future you could resume being part of their lives, and you will try to do what you can to heal the hurts that you've caused. And seems from what you're saying like you don't really want a divorce. He said, "No, I don't want a divorce." And I said, "Well, let me tell you this. I want you to tell your wife, first of all, make amends and tell her that she has every right to hate you and get rid of you, but you're available. You're not going to a divorce lawyer. You're going to try and stay steady and stay available. And from your perspective, there are many things about the marriage that were wonderful and you'd like them back. And there were disappointments in the marriage. She has plenty of them with you. You're not even going to process at this moment whatever disappointments you have with her. Not on the table. What's on the table is how you've hurt her and what she might need in order to even consider continuing with you. And you're not going to pressure her about coming back. You'll stay in the studio. If it goes on for a long time, you'll go rent an extended Airbnb or something. but you are committed to trying to fix what got broken. You will do the best you can, and you'll await leadership and instruction from her about anything you could do that would be a sign that maybe you're taking seriously how much she got hurt and what she needs you to do to start being a different person. Let her lead, and you follow. And we've been going down that trail ever since. He's still not home, but he declared to her his intention to repair the marriage. And finally, she said, I think I could be present with you again, but you have to do something first. It's first, you have to tell me all about your sexuality from the time that we stopped having any sex together. What have you been doing with yourself? So he said, this may upset you, but you want me to tell you, so I need to build trust with you. I prepared him. I will tell you every smidgen of truth. So he told her he was masturbating on the average of 3 times a week. She said, what were you daydreaming about while you were masturbating? And he said, he winced. He said, I'm very shy about that, but I'll try and describe my masturbation fantasies with you if you want to. And she said, is that all you did before you got together with the woman? Then he told her about the Korean massages and how he was getting Korean massages. And then finally, he told her about wanting to couple up with a woman. And she said, was she prettier than I am? And he said, no, she wasn't prettier. Was she younger than I am? No, she wasn't younger than you were. Was she a nice person? Yeah, she was really very kind. She was interesting to talk to. I hate hearing that. Well, I told you I would tell you the truth, so I'm telling you my truth, even if you hate hearing it. She said, something is very apparent to me. I said, what's the something that was apparent to her? She concluded that he was a sex addict, and that's what the problem was. And she couldn't consider getting back together with him unless he overcame his sex addiction. So he said, well, what do you want me to do to overcome what you think is my sex addiction? I don't experience myself that way, but maybe I'm blind and you're wise. I will follow your lead. You said, if I overcome my sex addiction, you might be interested and willing and exploring at least the possibility of remaining my wife. So tell me what to do to overcome my sex addiction. Whatever the hell her friend was. And her husband was a sex addict. He had to have several different women every week, even though he was married to her. And he eventually went into Sex Addicts Anonymous, and he went to meetings every day. And he goes to those meetings, and it's made a world of difference from him. He gave up anybody but his wife, and he's faithful to her. And she can tell when he's lying, and she even wants to make sure. So she's almost positive that he is only going to meetings. He's become a leader in the Sex Addicts Anonymous movement. And on top of that, he has agreed to go for lie detecting tests. So anytime she thinks that maybe there's some hanky panky going on and he's not being straightforward, he goes off to the lie detector center. And she tells the lie detector guy what she's interested in knowing and what prompts to give him. And then she gets a report back from the lie detecting detective about whether he's clean or not. And she feels very safe and very protected and at peace with being with him. So she said, I want you to start going to Sex Addicts Anonymous meetings every day. You have free time. You don't have to make art for as many hours as you do. And so he said to me, I don't think I'm a sex addict. I don't think that's what the problem is. He said, I'll own what I did was very hurtful to her and very disgusting to her. But I don't feel like I'm driven to have sex. I haven't had any sex with anybody since I was discovered that day. I haven't even been I haven't masturbated. I've been sex aversive ever since that happened to me. And she's not in any great danger. I said, it does not matter. You have the time. It doesn't cost you anything except inconvenience. It's a symbol that you're listening to her and you're attempting to meet her on a grounds that's comfortable for her. Please go do it. So he started doing it and he went regularly. He said, it's interesting. I don't mind going. I hear all kinds of stories. I am convinced I'm not like the people I'm listening to at all. But nevertheless, I'm happy to go. I try and chime in where I can. I give kindness, I give encouragement, I give practical suggestions if I have any. It's okay. I could stay there for the rest of my life. And if that's the price I had to pay for having my marriage back, it would be fine. So after several weeks of this, she agreed that she would allow him to come to the house because his work office is in the house and he had bills to pay and certain tasks to take care of in the house. And she let him be. And she was quiet. She wasn't angry. She didn't tee off on him. His boys were there. They came out and said hello to them. And he said to each of them, I'd like to make amends to you too. Would you let me just go out to lunch with each of you and have an hour's lunch with you somewhere? And they agreed to allow him to do that. So the rebuilding of his connection with his sons is beginning to proceed. They're beginning to have heartfelt conversations about the family and what was good and what was disappointing about the family. And they're not a problem anymore. They're accepting that he did these horrible things and that he now is a well-meaning person who's worth knowing and not throwing out of their lives. So that partial victory has been won. She's not willing to do much with him. She started with you've been 2 months now with Sex Addicts Anonymous. I want you to find a lie detector specialist. And he said, I don't want to find a lie detector specialist. And I said, well, here's a chance to engage with her. To find a fucking lie detector specialist. It's not admissible in court. I don't even know about the validity of what you'll be hearing or undergoing or what kind of problems false positives are going to cause for you. But she wants you to do this. This is another important symbol of something that she needs in order to believe you're serious about trying to accommodate to her. Now, you can begin to do something that hasn't happened yet. You can engage her in mutual problem solving. Tell her you may have found a lie detector specialist, but he needs something. He wants to know what kinds of questions are he to answer and present for test as whether he's lying or not. And tell your wife you can't bring that to him. You want to know what kinds of questions she wants you to check in with him about so that she can feel safe. You need to help. She needs to help you with this project of properly briefing the lie detector man or woman, or she won't feel safe that she's getting the true scoop unless she knows what kinds of things he's being grilled about. So would she sit down with you and help work out a set of questions that would be the usual questions plus anything else you might think of that would be novel in one time because you're sending them off again because you have some fear about something. So they did do that. And she said, I guess there are lots of things we need to talk about, she said to him. And he said, yes, and I'm eager to address them all. Under what circumstances would I come back? How are we going to conduct ourselves? Are we going to share a bedroom or are we not? What are we going to do with our house? What is the story we should tell? I gave him a bunch of questions. What is the story we should tell our acquaintances and or our relatives about what we're going through and what's happening? He said, I have something I want to add. I think we should not try and work our way through all these complexities and make the attempt at even assessing whether repair is proper without the help of a professional who knows about these things. I have the psychologist I went to. He seems very knowledgeable, but I have a feeling you'll think he's contaminated because I spent a lot of time with him and you wouldn't trust him to be a neutral judge and coach of what we need. So I'll tell you what, would you be willing to make a search and check and find us somebody to go to? I'll go to anybody you want. And then he hears a confession from her that he never heard about before. He said, I never told you, but about a year after the twins were born, I was thinking of leaving you, she said. She never mentioned a word of this to him during that period of time. She said, I saw a psychologist for 2 years. And she never said a word to him about visiting with a psychologist or what it was that they were talking about. And he said, Are you willing to tell me something about that experience? And she said, no, I'm not ready about that yet. And I said, well, if that psychologist was somebody you liked and trusted and thought that psychologist could be helpful now, I'd be willing to go meet with you. He's again being very accommodating and very responsive to whatever she's asking for him. Then the next best thing happened. She said, the oldest boy is going to, the oldest boy, he's the oldest by 5 minutes, I think. He came out of the womb after the incision was made first. He's going off to NYU, she said. He's going to New York. He's going the farthest away. We're going by plane. We're going to stay in a hotel for a day or two before he gets access to his dorm. Would you think of coming with us? And oh, was he overjoyed. That felt wonderful to him, that he could come actually and act like a reasonable father, going off with the mother of the child and spending a couple of days in there. She said, I guess we could get a room with twin beds in it. You could even stay in the same room with me. And he was delighted, and that's what he's looking forward to. They're going next week. But since then, I've heard from him again. There's been a little backsliding. The backsliding was she had reached beyond herself. She wasn't yet comfortable sharing a room and sleeping in the same room for him at night. So would he get a separate room in the hotel or go stay? They have friends in New York, or go stay with friends in New York. She is willing to go to the theater with him, out to dinner with him, do some things with the son who's going to be there. She's willing to act like a partial family or even a couple again with him for part of the time. So I told him, this is major, wonderful. You are on the path back towards her. And I left him after our last visit with a really nice metaphor. I said, this may be hopefully like breaking a bone. The brain, the bone was a feeble and bad bone to begin with. I don't like the story of what your marriage was like the last few years before it came apart. For 19 years after the kids were born, it was pretty sterile. And I have compassion for your wife, because she also told him during this confession about being with a therapist that she had been through what she called some kind of child molestation when she was a child. And I thought, how terrible. This is the first time she's told anybody. At last, she tells her husband, who's supposed to be her most intimate life partner, that this happened to her when she was a child, but withholds all the details or who the perpetrator was or what happened to her. And how was this a single thing or a continuing thing? Nothing. He knows nothing about it other than it happened. So I thought it was wonderful that she opened up that possibility to him. And I told him I had compassion for her. What happens if it's been a powerful sexual molestation of some kind, that the developing female sexuality gets crushed. Being sexual feels dangerous. It feels like it threatens to connect you with somebody in terrible ways. And women who are like that tend to not enjoy sex, to have unpleasant experiences when they have sex, to flee from letting any man, even one they're supposed to trust, touch them. She has had probably her own sensuality stolen from her when she was in childhood. And she's been willing to live all these years in an asexual life. That is a terrible tragedy. A rich life has two kinds of intimacy. It has intimacy of the stream of consciousness, where there are no secrets and a blending of thinking and daydreaming about everything. And it has sensual intimacy, where bodies come together to make pleasure with and for each other. And any life that's squelched one or another of those things is a partly troubled life. And maybe, with enough work over a long enough period of time, that bone that got broken and smashed by you with your behavior could grow back, and like many broken bones, would grow back even stronger than when it got shattered. And that's what we talked about at our last session. And I was glad to have met Shirley Glass and have listened to her and read from her book and heard some of her stories with some of her clients. And I was very glad to have had the infertility experience. I think both of those things helped me to be more present and wiser and kinder ways with him than I would have been if I hadn't had those life experiences. So I don't know how you interview a psychologist and find out what the sum total of important life experiences were that he or she may have gone through that may resonate with you and may help you think that this is somebody who might understand me. Maybe there should be a standardized questionnaire every one of us has to figure out about that. And then we could just hand that to anybody who thinks about seeing us. Now I'm getting really silly. But I shall move on into trying to make sense out of what I've been presenting to you today. I started off on the theme. Here's the same handout I used for myself last time. I started off with my theme of how individual we all are, like snowflakes, and how both our strengths and weaknesses are contained within two domains that have affected us. One domain is the actual professional training we receive. And believe me, that some of that training damages us. I would like to attest to that. It makes us less human than we started out. It's awful as far as I'm concerned. And there are certainly life experiences that have damaged us. And then on the other side, some of the things we learned in our practical and professional training are very useful. And certainly some of the life experiences we've lived through, even if they're painful, turn us into better companions and more useful companions. I then, as I always get a chance to do last time, and I will do again, rail at the psychiatric model. The psychiatric model is a terrible way of understanding and trying to be helpful to fellow human beings. It is based on what Freud called the autoplastic solution to being in personal trouble. Autoplastic means the self has to be fungible. The self has to be changeable. Psychiatric treatment aims to change the self. The self is suffering, the self is in trouble. The way to change it is to take a good pill that softens the self's reaction to what life is. The life that's being lived can be lived with greater peacefulness, greater sense of optimism, greater cheerfulness. The self has been changed to adapt to the circumstances. Psychiatric treatment. The opposite of that is alloplastic treatment. Life is terrible. What in your life needs to be changed? And I think any good psychologist or other kind of mental health worker is open to both kinds of change and actually finds change in both spheres very important. If there's to be effective and lasting change, in many ways, the self has to change. Some values have to change. Some feeling states have to be tamed. Some belief systems have to be changed. So internal parts of the self have to be changed. And how we're embedded in the world. So if something significant in how we're embedded in the world has not changed as a result of the work we've done, I think we failed. We've only accomplished a partial goal. What kinds of things have been changed? Somebody who's, I have a client right now who's very timid. It's very hard for her to speak up. She'll put up with terrible treatment at the hands of other people and not announce anything. She has a boss who is really very sadistic with her and actually also involves her in participating in affairs that are a felony. She is participating in a felony because she doesn't want to upset the boss and she doesn't want to get fired. And she doesn't want she knows the boss has a stormy temper and is likely to be screaming at her or may even assault her vigorously and physically if she brings up anything about her dissatisfactions. Much to my surprise, last week on her own, my client asked the boss if she could have some minutes of her time and royally told her off, told her all the vicious things she had done, all the illegal things she had done, and said she was quitting right there and the boss could go to hell. I never thought I would see that from her in a lifetime. I was thinking even I would go visit with the boss and hold her hand and keep her company and be a safe object, supporting her and sustaining her before she could ever do such a thing. Or we'd pick the phone up and get on two separate lines, and I would be listening and holding her hand while she did what she needed to do. Well, she far surmounted what I believed is necessary. So people changing their careers, changing the people in their lives, standing up and trying to model and require better behavior from the people in the network. There are a whole bunch of things that people can do. I have an elderly client who discovered with my goading and prodding, he discovered he had a love of poetry. And he actually managed to publish a book of poetry where he had been a pedantic person who did nothing but publish textbooks before that and didn't know anything about contemporary poetry. And there he accomplishes that. Not only that, he startled me again. He had been at some art museum in a wheelchair, and his wife was wheeling him around. There was a young man there, and they struck up a conversation, and they talked for a while, and he told about his poems. And the young man had a guitar with him, and the young man said to him, "Read me one of your poems." So he read him one of his poems, and the young man said, "That's beautiful. Would you like to turn your poems into folk songs?" And now suddenly he has a collaborator who showed up in his life. He has somebody who knows how to write music and can write beautiful melodies. And the two of them are going to work together. So he thought his life was over and he was waiting around to die at age 94. Now he has a very sacred project that he's all alive with again. So that represents another kind of what I consider a very significant change in how he's embedded in the world. And it's partly a change in himself too, seeing himself as somebody who's capable of generating poetry and maybe generating poetry that's worthy of being transmuted into actual folk songs that people would listen to. So how do you pick a therapist? I don't know how you pick a therapist. The first and obvious thing is go spend some time with one. Just don't go and make sure you're going to see the first person you're with. Maybe you'll waste money if they charge you for initial visits and see two or three or four people. Just feel how it feels to be with them. Feel how what they're saying to you strikes you. Does it make some kind of resonance for you? Do they seem to be saying some things that seem like they understand something that's important that you should pay attention to? Or is this a person that has a whole bunch of forms and paperwork for you to do and then takes a very structured family history and you don't get a chance to talk about what's on your mind at all? I would not urge that as a good model for what a good professional person is. So I would hope the therapist you see has some of the attitudes that I've given voice to, that they think they're on an artistic calling. It's a precious calling. And I will throw in that I haven't talked about here yet, although I have in other places. They should have a reverence for the encounter each time you come that's going to take place. Neither of you, when you show up with each other, have any idea where the session's going to go or what's going to get touched upon. When you as a client show up, you probably have some idea of something that's on your mind, or you may simply feel bored and out of it for the moment and wanting to rest and somewhat passive and want to ask to be taken care of. Would the therapist suggest something to talk about? But a conversation will start, and who knows where it's going. And as one of my colleagues, who is the former chief psychologist at Kaiser Permanente in San Francisco, wrote in a book called Single Session Psychotherapy, we do even extended psychotherapy best if we just imagine that the session we're having may be the only session we're ever going to have with the client. Maybe that's the session where the client is coming in to say that he or she has done enough of what they came to do and they don't feel like coming anymore. Or they may say circumstances have changed. The child is starting college. As much as they'd like to continue to pay out of pocket to you, they just can't afford anything but paying college tuition right now. So they're going to go on hiatus. Maybe when they're old, if you're still alive, they'll come back and talk to you some more. You never know what's going to happen, what session is going to be the last. And because we're trained so poorly and we're so mechanical instead of caring when clients show up, the modal number, and that figure in statistics, the mode is the most frequently occurring number. The most frequently occurring outcome of somebody coming to see somebody who's a mental health professional is they have exactly one visit and they decide not to proceed beyond the first visit. We're very good at turning people off and not being responsive to them and being stuffy with them or being very professional with them or being something that doesn't make the beginnings of an emotional bond between the two of us. So please don't see a therapist that doesn't feel like they're caring in any way and they seem somewhat mechanical. I just had a new client come 4 weeks ago. He had been to somebody else, a very well-known and renowned psychiatrist. His internist referred him to, and he was doing this virtually, and all he could see was the upper part of the of the therapist's body. And about 20 minutes in, he heard clicking, and he said to the therapist, "What's the clicking?" He said, "Oh, a text message came in that I couldn't resist responding to. I thought I would just try and take care of it while I was listening to you." That was enough to get my new client decide to move on, and I congratulated him. I think that's not the kind of thing we should do. That's a welcoming way to begin a relationship with somebody who wants to trust us and come to share everything with us. Okay, I guess that covers about what I was going to talk about today, and I have replaced the missing episode, and I'm open again. You can, if you want to, you can repeat whatever you said the last time around.
That would require me actually remembering what I said last time, and that's pretty
Make no
hard.
attempt to remember it.
I don't know if you remember this, Arthur, from probably many years ago, and this was sort of like there was certainly quite an audience for what was it, the David Viscott show, the
Oh, yeah.
radio
Yeah.
psychiatrist, and then Dr. Phil, and then there was the fervor with kind of like watching people kind of like react or hearing them react, to some type of intervention.
Yeah.
And my experience kind of like in terms of like the first session, with clients is that it can be very, very connecting in
Yes,
terms
it
of
is.
and certainly kind of like move on to kind of like the next session and then the course of psychotherapy, or potentially for some people very disconnecting, that,
Yeah.
okay, well, I'm not interested in this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's okay. That's the risk we run. We put ourselves out and we put our caring out, and it can either be taken or not. I'm very fond of saying, because I've had the experience, sometimes people come, but then they begin to get a sense of the grandeur, the difficulty, the complexity of what it means to come and spend some time wrestling with the meaning of life. And they decide they're not ready or they're not up for it. And all we've been able to do in one session or two or three is to plant some seeds, and those seeds can blossom later. I've had people come back after having an initial interview with me and come back 5 years later, and they're now interested in talking to me, and they weren't before.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's lovely, as a matter of fact. That's a very special experience, to plant seeds that are delayed in sprouting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I went to visit another client now for a moment, and Aaron knows him well because he burned me out finally, and I got so busy, I passed him on to Aaron. And one of the reasons I did was he was exceptionally wealthy. He was a trust fund guy who was crazy as hell, mean, crazy, confused, confrontational, difficult, uh, and wanting to be a perennial student for the rest of his life. He had a shitty student apartment close to UCLA, and he used to admire and want to be one of the students. That was his dream, to figure out maybe he'll go back to college and be one of the students, but he never had the courage to come back. I gave him to Aaron because I was doing very well and I was very busy. And I set an astronomical fee for him, and I sent him on to Aaron, so Aaron, who was struggling to build his practice, could have at least one person, if he would put up with the annoyance, who would pay him a major fee. But one point in the early stages of my working with him, I found out to my surprise, he had 7 therapists. I was only one of 7. The only real human connectedness he had was going to his therapy appointments with one after another. He never talked to about the same thing with any of them. And I was privileged because in the end, I was the only one who knew that there were 6 other therapists. Each one thought that they were the only therapist who was working with.
So did he still have all those therapists when he went to Aaron?
I don't
I
remember.
think
Did he have
so.
7 therapists? Were you a 7th therapist?
He had a lot of support of all different types of therapists, all types of, yeah, he was a seeker, that's for sure.
All right. Anything else at the moment?
No?
So thank you for letting me drag you in and rant again a second time, although you heard about a case you hadn't heard before today too. Have a good weekend.
Okay, you
All
too.
right,
Bye
Bye.
See ya.
now.
Bye, guys.